Yeah, but I think you're being intentionally coy about what this is a picture of.
What would I be being coy about? It's two people standing back to back in a picture.
Yeah, and that's all you see is two people.
I'm confused on what you would like me to speak on in that sense.
I don't think you are. I don't know why you do this. Act as if there's nothing noticeable about this apart from the fact that they're two people.
Well, I'm confused. Are you trying to get me to say that there are two different races in this picture?
Yes,
is that what you want me to say?
Good morning, everybody. So I woke up this morning and made myself some Irish coffee, to celebrate my heritage. And I watched a few of my favorite political commentators. And it got me thinking about what strategy that the left uses. Today, we're going to be talking about what I see as the three categories of the left's strategy. But first, everybody grab your drink. Throw down below what you're drinking. I want to know. Let's enjoy the intro. One of the things that is the same with any hard ideology, that people believe in a way that is irrational. I'm a Christian, so I'll give a little bit of self-deprecation here. Obviously, Puritans, the Catholic Church, and many other forms of Christianity have committed just heinous crimes against humanity, mainly through what seems like willful ignorance mixed with intentional brainwashing and authoritarian leaders. Although that last part we know isn't necessary. You don't really need a leader to commit a crime against humanity, as we saw in the French Revolution. So today, I just kind of want to relax with y'all. I still have a few articles we're going to go through, but we're really just going to talk about these three branches of leftist strategy. So the first branch is really easy. This is politics. This is politicians. It's been around for as long as we've been able to vote, probably even longer. I'm not going to explain this one too much because I think you already have the gist of it. These are the people that get into power and try to change rules towards the left. In fact, this is really arguably the end goal, is to get these people up there. And to do that, you have to make these people seem like better people than all the rest. Unfortunately, our political system doesn't look much at politics and policies. It looks more at character. In 2016, maybe 2015, I don't quite remember, but I was in a sociology class, and we had to design a survey, really to get to see if we can break down people into groups, something like that. I was not very into politics at the time. I knew enough to know I didn't know much. And so I decided to see if other people felt the same way. So I designed a survey just asking who people were voting for, and then asking if they can name any three policies of that person. I asked 100 students and 25 teachers, so it's a small pool, but it was big enough for me to get a general picture. Out of the 125 people, every single teacher said they were voting for Hillary. And all but 2 students said that they were voting for Hillary as well. In fact, I would do this right after class, and one student said they were voting for Trump, and they got bullied for probably the next 3 weeks over it. It was really sad to see. I felt horrible. I don't think I had much of a grasp on how charged a lot of people are. And it was only a handful of people that were charged, but a lot of other people joined in through a mob mentality. It was really disgusting. Anyway, out of the 125 people, 0 people, this includes the 25 teachers, 0 people could give me 3 policies. Some of them gave me 2. And I ended up writing that down. It was something like 6 people, maybe. But 0 could give me 3 policies. So I added a third question, and I asked, well, why are you voting for this person? The general answer was because the other person's evil. That, or it was because their parents are voting for that person. I think I had like one kid say they were voting for Bernie. His reason was very, very hateful as well, but it wasn't against the other politician. He was hateful against, banks and large corporations. Really didn't like Amazon. Tesla wasn't much in the news at the time, but I'm sure he would have hated Tesla too. Really any big corporation. But I said I wouldn't spend too long explaining this because we all pretty much know how our political system works. And it's you beat down the other person to try to lift your person up. If you can prove that your person is holier than thou, the exception to this would likely be Trump, right? This is likely why he won the election, because he absolutely did shellac the other person, but it was not to lift him up. I mean, he more so did it just for fun. A lot of people described him as a schoolyard bully, and I think that's probably accurate. And people loved it because it wasn't him saying, look, I'm holier than you. Look, I'm better than you. It was him seemingly joking around and having fun. And then on top of that, he would point out things that we haven't focused on or he thinks that we should be focusing on. Ironically enough, I probably consider him more of a politician than most of the politicians nowadays because he actually, in a very minor way, brought up policies like build the wall. Well, anyway, I could make an entire video probably talking about what bugs me about our political state, but I don't want to focus on that much. This is a minor part of the video and we're already a good chunk in, so let's go to the next part. The second column in the leftist strategy is going to be, now I think we all already knew I was going to say that, right? It's not hard to see. I brought up in my previous video how socialism crushes the individual, that notorious horrible dictator of Germany 80 some years ago was absolutely praised by the media in the United States to the point that he was put on the face of Times magazine. That's no joke. You can go watch that video. I'm going to throw it down in the bio. In fact, if you want to learn about socialism, that would be a really good place to start off. Anyway, tell me what you think about that video down below. We're going to continue. So the left has obviously always been way to the left. Why did they praise him, by the way? They did it because he put in socialist policies. In fact, he enhanced some socialist policies from the previous administration. Again, I'm not going to get too into that. If you want to learn more about it, I have a whole half-hour video that you can look at various misconceptions of socialism. Because a lot of people think that mustache man is on the right, and there's points that can be made there, but he certainly wasn't a libertarian. I mean, this is a big government man all around. So the media's job in this strategy is to really lift up the politicians, but not only that. The media's job in this strategy is to help construct the third column. And the third column is society. It's to help construct the way that we think about different issues that happen. This is why in my last video I brought up that there were 7 different mass shootings, but the media only covered 2 of them because they thought they were done by white people against people of color. They thought that they could push a narrative that wasn't there. In fact, the second shooting ended up being an Arabic man, if I remember correctly, which is a whole different narrative that they don't want to touch. Now, I'm fine with them not touching narratives. I'm fine with them steering clear of narratives, but that's not what they do. They have some very clear narratives. I like to think of the media as like a pilot light for the third tier, which is society. So the media constantly has a small flame under some of these issues, or all of these issues that they were trying to push with a narrative. For instance, I programmed for a bit. If I was writing an equation for the media, it'd be a pretty easy one. It would be if X happens, X being a shooting, a situation involving a gun, or some sort of violence. If X happens to a person of color, then it's racism. If not, then that means we need gun control. It's hard for them to push 2 narratives at once, but they can borrow from other narratives to support one narrative. So when the gas from society or from politics runs over these pilot lights, it blows up. The media will constantly have stories out about racism. The media will constantly have stories out about gun control, but they're kind of hidden in the background until the gas from society or from politics runs over it and it blows up, and you get a whole bunch of different stories about it. You get media coverage, you get social media coverage, you get X, Y, and Z from it. One issue that the media is hurting from right now is that in order to push these narratives, which again, the end goal of these narratives are new politicians and new policies put into place. In order to push these narratives, what they must do is change the way that society views these situations. The George Floyd death was not viewed as just horrible police procedure or even just excess violence used from a police officer, but it was viewed as a situation of racism. How? Can somebody go to that video, if you're willing to watch it, can somebody go to that video and tell me what part of that was racially motivated? Because I didn't see any part of that was extremely racially motivated or even mildly racially motivated. So how can they convince the whole society that this was a racist problem? I mean, we had the biggest riots in the United States history because of supposed racism from this issue. Well, let me tell you how they can call that racism. They've slowly constructed a narrative and a mindset of society of what they call systemic racism. Because of that, any incident involving two different races, mainly white against a different race, can be called racist. Because they can argue that the entire system is racist. Now, they don't give any evidence of this, but as a horrible man once said, if you say a lie long enough, people will start to believe it. If you say it so many times, people are going to start to believe it. If they hear it over and over and over again, then it's just common knowledge. In fact, I believe this is what the left would call socially constructed. Right, a lot of times when they talk about gender, they'll say things like toxic masculinity is socially constructed or gender is socially constructed. Society came up with norms for these things, and that's just what we take for granted. We don't really think through it. This is why I like to say that we're in a constant state of reevaluation, because we're looking over these things, but we're not evaluating the things that the left is pushing, like systemic racism. Alright, so one issue that the media is having right now is that they're trying to push an Asian racism narrative. Right, the issue is they haven't really pushed this too much before. This comes after that sex worker shooting that I talked about in my last video, and I'm sure you all have heard about, where a man went into massage parlors that he used to get sexual favors at and shot 8 women, 6 of who were Asian. Alright, but a big issue is that they haven't considered Asians a victimized group much before. Plus, the incident they're bringing up hasn't had a whole lot of traction because it's another one of those incidents where it's really hard to prove racism because it doesn't seem racially motivated at all. In fact, it seems motivated from that man's poor self-control, and he blames others for that. Which, by the way, if you're having an issue with poor self-control, this is an issue a lot of people have. I just want to bring this up really quick. If you're having an issue with poor self-control, drug abuse, with sex abuse, not sexual abuse, but with sex abuse, where you use it as a way to cope, if you're having a problem with alcohol abuse, or eating too much, these are things that a lot of times in society will be told are perfectly normal and you don't have to do much about. This is why you have the no slut shaming movement. This is why you have the anti-fat phobic movement, or whatever you would like to call that. If you have these problems, one, I want to point out that you are personally responsible for them, but that doesn't mean you have to hold all the weight on your shoulders. The only person that will allow you to get better is you, and there's no simple action you can take to get better other than pushing yourself to seek help. That is not what this man did here. In fact, this man, on a very minor level, did the same thing that the Red Band Germans, I'm not allowed to say their group name, but that the Red Band Germans, that the National Socialist Germans did. They found someone to blame their problems on. They found a group of people to blame their problems on. They dehumanized them, and that allowed them to do horrible, horrible things in their mind justifiably. A lot of times I like to say that the only way that you can fight these narratives is to become more personally responsible, is to become a better person, to become more humble and more wise. Intelligence matters, but it doesn't matter a whole lot. You want to become more humble, more wise, harder working. That's really the only way to fight these narratives. It's not with a new narrative, it's with better people. Anyway, that was a long tangent, so I'm sorry about that. So we're going to hop right back on track with what the media was struggling with this Asian racism narrative that they were pushing. In fact, I'm going to throw up a few articles for you. We're just going to go through them real quick to show you just how hard they were trying. March 27th, CNN said it's a tough time to be an Asian. This is Paul Verkaman at CNN. It's a tough time to be Asian. Demonstrator says at Los Angeles rally to end anti-Asian violence. Now, I believe that LA will riot over, I don't know, a baby dropping their bottle. I mean, they riot almost as much as Portland, Oregon does. I mean, it's pretty much every night, I feel like. So the fact that they're having a rally doesn't mean a whole lot to me. In fact, I'm rather impressed that it didn't get violent. You have the whole hashtag Stop Asian Hate. In fact, I even saw some people posting that dating apps like Tinder popped up Stop Asian Hate when you accessed the app after this incident happened. Reminds me of after the George Floyd incident, I logged on to Modern Warfare, Call of Duty, and it popped up, tell me if y'all remember this, and it popped up, we support Black Lives, something like that. I'm like, you didn't have to, I'm here to kill people. Like, I don't feel like this is the place for you to be telling me what lives you support. And on top of that, I wasn't questioning it. I wasn't going here like, I wonder if this game, where the entire objective is to try to shoot people in the head before they shoot you in the head, cares about Black lives. It just didn't run through my head, but I guess I'm glad that they told me. I'll point out, they never said they supported Asian lives, so they're probably part of this problem, right? Anyway, so we've got this first article. We'll move on to the second one. Atlantis ball attacks shine a light on anti-Asian hate crimes around the world. Do they know? Well, let's go to the next one. Asian Americans reported being targeted at least 500 times in the past 2 months. Oh, geez. Whew. There's like 18.5 million Americans, but that's probably just from, well, they didn't say in an area, so I guess that's worldwide, right? That's 2 months, so multiply it by 6 and you'll get the year. So you've got probably, 3,000 incidents a year? That's a lot, right? Well, they break it down here for you, like 10 paragraphs in. They break it down for you. Let me read this small paragraph for you. The majority of the incidents, about 68%, were causes of verbal harassment. Remember, everybody, these could be micro assaults, right? These could be people saying things like, oh, where are you from? These could be people just making jokes. The next 20.5% are them being shunned or avoided. Shunned or avoided? That just means somebody doesn't talk to you. You know how many times I don't hear somebody, or I don't realize they're talking to me, and I keep walking? Maybe a portion of those are people being ignored for being Asian. Likely not all of them. They didn't even say being targeted for being Asian. They just said these are incidents that Asians reported. And finally, we get to 11% of the incidents were physical. So what, like 55 of them? I don't know about you, but when I hear Asian Americans being targeted, I think of violence, but really only 11% of them were. They said more than a third, 35.4% of the incidents took place in businesses. 25.3 were in public streets and 9.8 in public parks. Nearly 11% of the reports involved online incidents, according to the organizations. Now, I would believe it, to be honest. I would believe this is way worse if they said 90% of the incidents happened online. Or I guess like 89, since 11 of them were physical, which means they probably had to be in person. Right, because people on the internet, quite frankly, are a lot worse than they are in person. I don't think there's many people who would argue that. Except for you guys. You guys have, quite frankly, been phenomenal. In fact, I'm going to go throw out a thanks to you guys. You guys have given me a lot of support, and I appreciate it. But a lot of people on the internet are just horrible, vicious people. All right, but if an incident happens in a business, you can report it to HR, especially if it's racial, and if HR does nothing about it, you can sue. Or you can email CNN. I'm sure they'll make, well, this is Asian hate, so maybe now they would make an incident about it, before they wouldn't. Alright, the point of this is, you can tell they're trying really hard to push a systemic narrative of Asians being targeted. The reason they're doing this now is quite obviously because Trump had called this the China virus, right? And so they're trying to blame that on him. When you're trying to support multiple narratives, eventually they will collide. In fact, in business classes, one thing that you learn is that the business plan has to only have one goal, and every single part of that business needs to be moving toward said goal. This is because if you get multiple different goals, eventually they're going to collide. This is what happens when you're running multiple different narratives. Now, I'll give CNN credit. They did have a few fairly objective articles in 2015 over the Asian Harvard court case. In fact, even in 2018, while the court case was still going on, I believe, they posted an article. Let me see if I can find it really quick. Yeah, here it is. The Harvard administration puts the school's dirty secrets on display, where they talk about the anti-Asian issues. In fact, the article reads, I'll just read a quick part of it. As a trial over alleged discrimination against Asian Americans in Harvard administration finishes its first week, one thing has become clear: there are ways to win a place at the Ivy League college that fields a surplus of applicants with perfect grades and test scores. Then they list off a few things, which are family, wealth, and connections to the school. We already know that. I mean, there was a major case of celebrities paying millions of dollars to get their children into these schools. I'm sure you'll remember that happened maybe around this time, 2018, I think, maybe 2017. Anyway, athletic superiority. Yeah, that's pretty much any college. And an African American or Latino background all significantly enhance an applicant's chances. In some instances, students whose families pledged over millions of dollars to fund a building or endow professorship get an advantage, emails show. They list a few other things. I'll put this down below if you want to read more, but I don't think it's hugely important. I did want to give them credit for that, though. They're even pointing out that African American and Latino backgrounds significantly enhance an applicant's chances. Okay, but that kind of pushes back on the narrative that we need to put in place things like affirmative action, where we specifically let more African American or Latino people into workplaces or colleges, not based on their skill, but just based off their race. Okay, that kind of conflicts with they shouldn't discriminate against Asian Americans, right? Because if 50% of Harvard is Asian American, they have to get 250 points higher on the SAT to get in, and they're still making up 50%. Then if you put everybody on even ground, they'd make up 90% of Harvard. I mean, that's likely just a fact. And so you have to, as the media says, have a bit of Asian hate there. You have to have a little bit of discrimination against Asians. You might even call it racism against Asians if you're going to also push the narrative that we need things like affirmative action. And so they're having a hard time getting the ball rolling because they've avoided the Asian hate narrative for a long time, but now they're trying to bring them together. The point of them pushing this right now is because we already have a nationwide discussion talking about racism and systemic racism. And it's of benefit to the left if they can slide in, because it's only a slight tangent over, and it will help them make arguments in the future if society believes this blindly, if they follow this blindly. Let me give a quick example of where this would be useful in a debate where they're talking about how racism is horrible. A lot of times conservatives will bring up things like the left seems to support discrimination against Asians, even though they're a minority, in favor of affirmation of, say, African Americans, right? A lot of times this Harvard case is brought up. But if they have in place a narrative of systemic Asian discrimination, then they could point to that and say, but we're fighting that, right? right? We're fighting this fight over there. How dare you say that about us? We're fighting this fight over there. The main takeaway from that is going to be that they don't really want equality or even equity, right? Equity is what's fair. I think we can all agree that what would be fair is the people that deserve to be in Harvard getting into Harvard, right? The people with the grades. But let's go back to the main point of what I'm talking about. So their strategy here is to slowly change the third pillar of their strategy, which is society. They have to slowly change society so they can push more and more ridiculous narratives, and therefore, on top of that, they can push more and more ridiculous policies, and we will blindly go along with it. If we're terrified, we will likely not question the government trying to, quote, help our safety, help keep us safe, give us security. I could ramble for a long time about that, but frankly, I did that in my last video, so if you want to check that out, I'll go ahead and throw a link to that below as well. Real Clear Politics says, London County VA public school teacher calls out student for not seeing race. Here, let's play that video real quick.
The story behind this picture, I'd rather hold on to that. Just tell me what this seems to be a picture of.
It's just two people chilling.
Right, just two people. That's nothing more to this picture?
Nah, not really. Just two people chilling.
I don't believe that you believe that. I don't believe that you look at this as just two people. I don't think
Truly
you
is
can look
just
at
two
this as
people,
just
though,
two
is it
people.
not?
Yeah, but I think you're being intentionally coy about what this is a picture of.
What would I be being coy about? It's two people standing back to back in a picture.
Yeah, and that's all you see is two people.
I'm confused on what you would like me to speak on in that sense.
I don't think you are. I don't know why you do this. I'm not trying to call you out, but you come out off of mute to talk about what this is a picture of, and you act as if there's nothing noticeable about this apart from the fact that they're two people.
Well, I'm confused. Are you trying to get me to say that there are two different races in this picture?
Yes,
is that
I
what
am
you
asking
want
you
me
to
to
say
say?
that.
Well, at the end of the day, wouldn't that just be feeding into the problem of looking at race instead of just acknowledging them as two normal people?
No, it's not, because you can't look at the people and not acknowledge that there are racial differences, right?
But if we're going for, let's say if we're looking for equality within all this, then why would we need to point out things such as that?
Because those differences are real things.
Okay, so one of the best ways to tell if someone is cheating on you is if they constantly accuse you of cheating. In fact, one of the best ways to tell if someone is lying to you is if they constantly accuse you of lying to them. It's a basic human process of thinking where when you do something often enough, especially if it's something you try to keep private, like cheating or lying, then you will accuse other people of doing that quite a bit, or at least think that they are doing that to you, because in your head they're also keeping that thing private. Okay, it's the same thing with racism. A lot of times if someone is constantly accusing other people of being racist, it's because they themselves are racist. This man cannot see past race, and leftist narratives has given him a pseudo-moral avenue to go down to say, yes, I see race, and I know that that's kind of racist, but I can ignore that racist aspect of it and say that I'm moral for seeing it. And the fact that I focus on somebody's race means everybody else does as well. Now, obviously, if the first thing you take into account of somebody is their race, we're never going to get to a spot of not being racist, right? Because the moment that you focus on something, people are going to have conflicting views on it. Now, this isn't something new, and it's not something abnormal. This is a very classic trope of socialism or fascism or any large government control or any large authoritarian control system, right? Because if you can segregate people into groups, you can get rid of seeing individuals, and you can coerce people into only seeing the group. That allows you to do a lot of horrific things without people acknowledging it or combating it, right? And I know this is just an anecdotal incident, okay? I'm not trying to pass this off as the norm for all teachers, but I think it's important when somebody thinks that they can get away with something like this, when they think it's appropriate to badger somebody like that who has a different view. I'm going to tell a quick personal story. When I was about 5 or 6 years old, I started going to an all African American church. In fact, the only white people there were myself and my family. I didn't see a difference. I was like 5 or 6, and race had never been talked about in my household. To any extent, it wasn't brought up, at least not in front of me. And so I go to this church for 15 years. The people were my family. It still are my family. I mean, we still talk to each other weekly. I loved them and they loved me, and race was never brought up. I was never looked at different. Well, we eventually had new people join who looked at me a little different, who made it very awkward every once in a while. But the large majority of the church knew me since I was 2 feet tall. I mean, these guys, they didn't see me as a white kid. They just saw me as their kid. They saw me as part of their family. They were with me when my mother passed away. They were with me throughout some very hard times in my life. And I never looked at them any different because I was never taught to. I was never coerced to. I didn't even think of it as a way of thinking. I mean, until 6th or 7th grade when I brought one of my friends with. My friend was very awkward there, and I couldn't tell why. And then my friend looked over at me and went, "We're the only white people here." I looked around and I went, "Oh yeah, we are. But this is my family. Why does it matter that they're this way?" And the left used to agree with that narrative, right? The left used to agree that seeing race was an issue. Now, I could look around and go, these people are a different color than I am. I mean, that's just a fact, but it never popped up into my head like these guys must have completely different stories than I have. These guys must be from a wildly different culture because of their race. Like, I haven't even talked to these people. I've never interacted with them before, but they must be from a wildly different culture because they're a different race. That itself is racism, but you can't do a whole lot with that policy-wise, right? Because there's not a whole lot of evidence that there's policies you can put in place with American acceptance over people seeing race. But there are policies you can put in place if you argue that you should see race, that policies should be made on the basis of race. You see, the issue with the not seeing race narrative is not that race automatically means that you've had a different life experience and we should immediately assume that of you because of nothing more than your race, but the importance of that narrative is that if you make the moral goal people not taking into account race into a person's character, if you make that the moral goal, then it is morally inept. It is morally malicious to make policies, to make legislation on the basis of race. But if you make it the moral standard that seeing race, that making race the first part of somebody's character on the moral high ground, you make that the moral goal, then it's moral for you to make policies on the basis of race. And so there's a lot more power in that. Now, we've seen this go wrong many times, and again, I'm going to direct you over to my previous video, Why Socialism Crushes the Individual. But just know it doesn't end well. This isn't a good system, and it's certainly not a moral system. As a Christian, I'm taught to see people of different religions. I'm taught to see people of different races as just another person, especially if they're Christian. I'm supposed to see them as my equal, as another brother or sister in Christ, as another part of the body. Just coming from that, it is obviously immoral to see people differently just based on their race. Go to my next article by Sky News titled, "Schoolboys Made to Apologize for Stuff We Didn't Do," in quotes, during assembly about sexual assault. So I believe this is either in Australia or the UK. Some sort of country under the Victorian government had done this. So it's not in the United States, and I don't want to gaslight you into thinking it's in the United States. I'm going to read just the bolded part. I've read through the article already, and I can summarize it pretty well. I'll like I always do, I like to be transparent. I'll throw it down in the bio, so if you want to check it out, you can. But I'll summarize and paraphrase it pretty well for you, I think. The bolded part reads, "A boy was made to apologize to female classmates for, quote, behaviors of his gender. He says he was forced to, quote, apologize for stuff we didn't actually do." You can see the way these two narratives collide. In fact, I think you'll probably be able to see this in the Asian hate narrative fairly soon as well. But you certainly see this in the Black Lives Matter narrative. You certainly see this in even the mass shooting narratives that are pushed. And this technique is to take something that an individual did and then put that individual into a group and say that group did this. Like I just talked about over here with the teacher badgering the kid for not immediately pointing out these people's race. It's dividing people into groups and then assuming things about those groups, and that was something that I thought that America at one point was moving towards seeing as a horrible, horrific, terrible thing, especially after the 20th century when governments that did this were probably the number one cause of death. But instead of doing that, we're starting to divide people into groups again. This isn't progress. This isn't progressive. This is regressive and eventually going to be repressive, because you can't divide people into groups and then not attribute the horrible things of those groups to the individual. When you do that, it dehumanizes a person. If all you see when you see a black person, if all you see when you see a white person is the monstrosities that different people in those groups have done, then it dehumanizes a person and justifies hateful and violent action against them. It also justifies very repressive and oppressive and authoritarian policies against that group. Like I said, all three of these columns work together. The media works to change society's mind, and when society's mind is changed, it allows a bigger avenue. It provides new paths for politicians to go through without being questioned, without being seen as authoritarian, without being seen as in the wrong. Now, like I said, the media is kind of a pilot light, but the large stories of the media go in a pattern. They go in a cycle. It's a pretty easy cycle to see. We always have the underlying race narrative because racism is seen as the original sin, as a horrible stain on America as a society. And so it's really easy to keep that one going pretty much indefinitely. But it still goes to the backlight when things like school shootings happen. We've already had our shooting narrative. There might be 2 or 3 more shootings that the media focuses deeply on. But we've gone through racism. That's George Floyd. That's BLM. We've gone through that narrative. We've gone through the gun control narrative. Right, that's what we're on now. When the media was found with egg on their face, pushing how horrible the Atlanta shooting was because it was done by a white person, and then it ended up not being done by a white person. They had to quickly switch the narrative over to gun control. We've gone through the gun control narrative. So what's next? Well, there's 3 options. Universal health care as a right, abortion as a right, or calling the United States a rape culture. These are the three narratives left throughout the rest of the year that the media will focus on, and I can say that confidently because they've been doing this since I paid attention to the news, and far before that, I'm sure. If they can beat these narratives in, they can slowly start to change society and the way that society views these issues. The real point of this is to control the assumptions that are made when something happens by society to justify various policies and actions done by institutions and the government. Now, my guess is that abortion is likely next, because abortion is a nice little stream that feeds into these other two things, right? Because it's really hard to make the case for pro-abortion, saying that you have the high ground, because it doesn't take much of a genius to see an unborn baby as a human life, right? So they're really fighting upstream. They're fighting uphill for this one. So in order to justify it, they'll take a portion of 1% of the abortion cases, which are those that are caused by rape, and they'll use that to justify the hundreds of thousands of abortions that happen every year. Again, only not even a whole 1% of those, a portion of 1% of those are because of rape. And they'll use that to justify the whole swath of it, so they can easily pivot from that over to America's rape culture. In fact, they almost have to do that to justify these. If they can convince society as a whole without many facts or statistics that America is a place of great rape, that America is a place that supports rape, then they can more easily push abortion laws. And then they come up with sayings like, I'm pro women's rights, or I'm pro women's health care. Things like that. They'll come up with little sound bites that you can say over and over that sound like they mean something different than that they mean. And they'll come up with those, and it's really easy to pivot from I'm pro women's health care to we should have universal health care, right? Not only should women have the right to go get an abortion, but also the government should pay for that. And by the government, I mean you, by the way. That's who I'm talking about. The fact that we like to say free healthcare or free college is obnoxious. It's not free. It's you paying for that. So I'm going to recap a little bit because I went on a few tangents over explaining some things. I understand, I do that. So I'm going to recap real quick just to give you a little summary of what I've been talking about. The leftist strategy has 3 different pillars. The first is politics. The second, the media. The third is society. These all work hand in hand. The media works to change societal standards. Over time, society changes, which allows more pathways and bigger pathways for politicians to make more authoritarian laws. The way that they do this is by breaking people down into groups. That's their best strategy anyway. It's to break people down into this group or that group, divided by race, divided by ideology, divided by gender, divided by whatever they can. And once you break people down into groups, you can attribute any horrible thing that a person from that group has done, or a segment of that group has done, to the entire group, and justify regressive and eventually violent actions or policies done to people of those groups because you've already dehumanized them. And the only reason I say the left right now is because they seem to have institutional power over the media. And the baseline of a, say, non-political person, a person that claims that they're non-political, is on the left. If you meet someone who says they're not political, they're more than likely voting Democrat. But make no mistake about it, if the right had control of these institutions, the same thing would happen. The only way to prevent these things from happening is to take control of your own life and not rely on the government to try to make your life better, to try to allow you to go further in society, to allow you to have this for free or that for free, or to protect you any more than they are able to by taking away your rights. The only answer is to see yourself as an individual with autonomy, with a locus of control of your own life to an extent Now you only have an internal locus of control to an extent. You can't control everything that's going to happen to you, but the government can't stop a tornado running through Illinois. They can't stop a hurricane from hitting Florida. They can't stop another person on the street high on, say, fentanyl or PCP or alcohol or drunk driving running into you and injuring you. These things are horrible. And we would love to do whatever we can to stop it, but the answer is not giving control to the government. The only thing that we can make our lives better is recognizing the control that we have over our own life and taking the personal responsibility that comes with that. That's the only answer. Keep an eye open for these strategies. Don't take things at face value. In fact, think within yourself what the implications of these strategies would be. That's it for me today, guys. I've talked for long enough. I'm sure you're bored of me. If you're not, you can go check out my other videos that I've posted. Tell me what you think of them. Throw down in the comments what you think of my observation of the leftist strategies. Tell me what you think of the examples I used. Tell me what you think I did well, what you don't think I did well. Throw a like down there, hit the subscribe button and that little bell. And most importantly, everybody, you have a wonderful day.